If we think about the possibilities for anti-avoidance work in the UK, it's easy to think that the horizon looks a little bit bleaker than it did a couple of months ago. I don't really think we should think that, but we need to be realistic about how the context has changed. There's basically three levers on avoidance. One is capacity, and we heard very clearly from Kathy this morning just how hard capacity at HMRC has been cut. That's not going to come back in any hurry. And we only need to look at the US to think about the effect of taking that further to an extreme. The IRS has gone from being arguably the most powerful tax authority in the world to a failing organisation that's unable to answer 40% of the calls it gets from taxpayers. Right? HMRC is not there, but that road of starve the beast only leads in one direction. Capacity is not going to be the answer to the UK's avoidance problem. The second set of answers come from law. And we're seeing individual changes like the diverted profits tax that have the potential to make some changes. We're seeing some progress in the OECD base erosion and profit shifting initiative, but we know, not least because of the actions of this government, that some of that possibility for progress has been undermined, or at the very least limited quite seriously. So that leaves the third area, which is transparency, where we're looking, and we also heard Margaret Hodge say, you know, they parliamentarians understand that law on its own can't stop avoidance, and that's right. A big part of this is about tax as a social act, not paying because you have to, but paying because you choose to, and that applies to companies as well as individuals. But one of the big drivers of that is the third area we're thinking about, which is transparency. When there's no transparency, your incentive to behave well is much smaller than when there is high transparency. And you know, there's all sorts of evidence for that in all sorts of areas of tax. And we've seen very clearly different ways in which that acts with corporate taxation. So one area where we need to keep pushing very hard is for public country-by-country reporting. Having country-by-country reporting for tax authorities only goes some way, but it doesn't provide the basic accountability that underpins. That's accountability for tax authorities as well as the multinationals on whether tax is being paid in the right place. But the other angle, of course, is the fair tax mark type angle, the sort of brands, or the responsible 100 and other mechanisms of that sort. But particularly I think the fair tax mark now has a momentum that isn't present elsewhere, that has the potential to drive that transparency and compliance relationship in particular. But look, only if we get it right. You know, there has been a great deal of progress, and yet we're talking about 10 to 20 companies, and then the next one's in the pipeline. This is not yet the kind of critical mass that's going to change the UK compliance and avoidance picture at the higher level. So I go back, I was thinking as I walked in this morning, in something like February 2011, Newcastle University asked me to give their annual lecture on fair trade. So as I only have one hammer, and that looked a bit like a nail, I basically talked about a fair tax mark, which they loved, probably. The commonality is very clear, and that's why everyone keeps making this slip. You know, everyone who's ever had this idea has thought, wow, the fair trade mark, that's great, we need to do that for tax. Right? The main central point is that it's not something you can just do, you can sell as a CSR win-win. You're talking about a genuine distribution towards the people or the countries involved in the economic activity, greater than they are currently getting. So it bites in a way that a lot of CSR stuff doesn't necessarily. So there are direct distributive consequences. But it relies upon the same logic also, which is creating a business value for ethical behaviour. And that comes from three things, and I suspect we've done two of them well, and the third one is the one we need to work on. The first one is having technical engagement and the trust of the companies that you're dealing with. I think the fair tax mark has really done very well in that area, especially recognising how kind of poisonous some of the relationships between civil society and companies have been in this area. The second one is having public trust, and the evidence from YouGov today is very reassuring in that area. The third area, though, is the one where I think there's a lot of work to do, and that's about brand recognition. If you think about yes, fair trade was a slow burn, but when it got going, the spread of fair trade churches or hospitals or councils or cities, the power of those collective bodies, one way or another, saying we in total, and to some extent all the people who are part of us, are buying this, is enormous. And that's, that seems very far away from the kind of base that we've got now. So we've got the technical stuff, we've got a degree of trust, we haven't got that spread. And that's what really is going to make this worthwhile to a greater number of companies, not just the ethical leaders. When we get to the tipping point is when companies are saying, why wouldn't we do this? Not, come on, make the case to us. And that only happens, I think, when we get to that scale. So, as I run to the airport, I'm going to leave you with one thought, which is this. The pledge came out today. If the people in this room are not going to be leaders in evangelising for the Fair Tax Pledge, taking it to your MP, taking it to your church, your hospital, your NGO, your companies, your peer groups, then nobody else is going to do it. All right? So if we're in a different place in 1, 2, 3 years, it's because of what people in this room started to do today with that pledge. So, your challenge.